Hello and welcome everyone to the Heal Yourself, Heal the Earth Global Online Conference, where you will receive inspiration and empowering tools to deepen into your path of personal and planetary healing. I am your host for the event, Monique Chalice, and today I'm so excited to be speaking with Dr. John Ryan. Dr. John is a board-certified MD, professor of medicine, and longtime student and practitioner of energy and consciousness-based medicine. He is the author of Unity Field Healing, Volume 1, Foundations of Energy Medicine and Quantum Healing. This book is a holistic primer designed to bring to the reader a panoramic understanding of the awakening power of spiritual, consciousness, and energy-based healing, and serve as a practical and personal tool to deeply integrate this new human potential. He is also the founder of Unity Field Healing, a new quantum healing process based on conscious activation of the DNA quantum field to support healing and personal evolution. So welcome, Dr. John. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Monique. It's really a pleasure for me to be here, and a big hello to all of our listeners as well.
Yes, and I love the title of your talk today, which is Planetary Ascension and Human Healing. What on earth is going on? So let's start with that title and maybe break it down a little bit. So what do you see is the nature of healing itself?
So, healing, it's a great question. So healing is a big topic, and we use the word to mean lots of things. So in traditional sense, we think of healing when we have a disease or a condition and we're, receiving therapy of some kind or surgery of some kind to overcome a state of illness. And we think of the body's response to that as healing. So it's the ability of the body to overcome illness or conditions. But we also use the word in a much bigger way. We talk about societal healing and cultural healing, and then we expand in terms of human healing into the concepts of energy healing and consciousness-based healing. And the word healing to me really, it means a reset. It's a restoration process. So when something is out of alignment or not functioning to an optimal capacity, or ideally the way it would in balance, healing is the process that brings it from a state of being into a better state of being, if you will, or a more balanced state of being. So healing, in many ways, is a restoration of balance. And it's the balance that allows the optimal functioning of the human body and the human mind, if you will. So it's a little different than the way, I guess, 3D medicine or traditional medicine would look at healing. Healing is really getting over a condition, getting over a disease state. But really healing in a much more deep understanding is calling upon the innate intelligence within the body and within the spirit to bring forth a more optimized state of wellness. And that healing can instigate many things. It can be a very straightforward thing like a physical healing. You have a cut or a wound and your body responds to this by stopping the bleeding and then allowing the body to begin to regenerate tissue and all of this type of stuff. But with healing in the bigger sense is really calling upon the spirit. It's the innate wisdom within us to come forward and to put things right, whether it's in the physical or the mental and emotional realms of our being. So healing expands into this almost intangible, effervescent, ethereal concept when you really stretch it to the limits of what it might be. And but it's an important word because it really calls upon an understanding of the spiritual part of the healing process when you look at it in a larger context. And so you might ask the question, how does our body know how to heal? How does our body know how to make a situation right? How does our body know how to comfort us through a loss or through a heartbreak and so on? And you realize that we're calling upon a level of information and consciousness that is really ethereal. It's really hard to understand where that wisdom and that knowledge is stored, if you will, or how we access it and how we bring it into being. So much of it happens spontaneously or without any direct conscious control. But this is a really important time, I think, on the earth, because this concept of healing is stretching into the realms that we're talking about. So people are starting to understand the energetic nature of reality and how consciousness forms reality or participates in creating a certain quality of reality. So you hear statements like the way you think controls your reality or it creates your reality. And what we're really saying in statements like that is your consciousness molds what shows up in form. In other words, the way you think, the way you feel, certainly think and feel habitually, tends to show up in a form way in our lives. And it's a really important understanding to begin to grasp, because you realize that the consciousness patterns that we each hold as individuals have a huge bearing on our health and on our well-being. And if that were the end of the story, I guess we'd be stuck, because we would just have these consciousness patterns with nothing to do about it. But we have within us too, what you might call a higher wisdom or a higher knowledge, a higher intelligence. We have access to information that we tend to think of as spiritual, but you can also, in more scientific terms, think of it as multidimensional or quantum in nature. And you can bring this information into your mind, into your body, to bring healing that seems kind of mystical or mysterious when we look at very traditional methods of healing. So it's a bit of a long answer, but I think it sort of sets the foundation for what we're really talking about when we use the word healing in modern day context.
Yes, absolutely. And the other part of your title of your talk was Planetary Ascension. And we hear people talking about the ascension of the planet and a new paradigm. So I wonder if you can explain what that means really and how it ties in with human healing and everything you've just explained.
Okay. Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah.
So let's take a few steps back. So when we talk about healing, really, we've addressed the idea that it's a restoration process. It's kind of bringing in information or knowledge or balance to create a more optimized physical or emotional or psychological state of being. That's traditionally what healing kind of is when we think in terms of consciousness-based healing. But something is happening on the planet. And so for many years now, people have been talking about energy medicine and vibrational healing, and people are tapping into an understanding that there's this mysterious level of reality, if you will. It's an energetic level of reality that is part and partial of the human experience. And we can actually access this energetic level of reality to bring healing. Now, to people who are very strongly scientific minded and 3D anchored, this kind of stuff is all poo-poo. It's kind of hard to imagine. It just seems very airy-fairy or, too light to think about. It has no rational context. So it's not good for a show me kind of a person. It's someone who's really 3D. It's not easy for them to access an understanding of what this is until they start to see physical proof of the reality of what's being discussed. And that's not a bad thing, because it ultimately has to manifest in some way. So even if we're talking about very ethereal things, if it's not leading to healing or bringing healing into reality, then it isn't working. So, to have that kind of discernment, if you will, or validation is not a bad thing. And so scientifically minded people need that, of course. They need to see physical, tangible evidence of things changing. But it's hard to understand the concepts because we're talking about elements in the equation that are non-visible. And in order to begin to understand that, we have to think in terms of energy. Now, when we think about the human body, we're very used to thinking of it as a physical structure. We have a physical body, we have skin, we have hair. When we sit here together, you can see my body, I can see your body, we can have a communication. Everything about it is very tangible. But when you look at matter as it exists, like the form of the body, any kind of form, substance actually, and you start to reduce it down to more elemental particles, you'll break things down into elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, all this kind of stuff. And then if we keep going, we'll go down to the level of the atom. And the atom is really an energy particle. And it's really, a proton or neutrons in the middle with this orbit of electrons around it. And it's created by this force field of electromagnetic energy. And every single cell in our body is filled with thousands and thousands and millions of these atoms. So our whole body is an atomic structure. And when you realize that the atom is a particle of energy, it's an energetic particle, and that's what we're made up of, it allows us to begin to realize that our body is actually made of energy too. And so why that becomes so important is it decrystallizes the concept of things being able to change. Now, what I mean by that is, if you have a stone and you're looking at it, it's so solid and it's so hard and it's so real, it's hard to imagine that changing or transforming into something. And when we look at the physical world, that's how we see it. We see it as it is. It's immutable, it's very static and very hard to change. And so if we're dealing with a disease in that physical body, again, it becomes very fixed. We see it as a concept, it's so hard to undo that, if you will, or to fix that or change it. But when we start thinking in terms of energy, it turns matter into something that's more liquid. It would be like looking at a glass of water instead of a block of ice. And so it loosens the rigidity of the structure. So if energy can interface with the body in different ways to invoke positive or coherent changes, there is a potential that it could actually have a positive influence on what the body is doing or what it looks like. So if we could restore energetically somehow a different balance, a different state of energy, you name it, into the physical body, then the potential to create a healing would occur. Now, in science, we encounter this when you run into things like spontaneous healing. Someone has a disease that's not supposed to go away, and then all of a sudden, poof, it's gone. And science just kind of throws its hands up in the air, and we say, oh my gosh, I guess it's a miracle, or maybe the diagnosis wasn't right in the first place, or, we go through this whole logic. But it's a mystery why that person healed. And in fact, when we do scientific studies, everything is done compared to a baseline of, when we do a random controlled study, we see what happens with placebo versus the medication or the treatment that's being given. And the placebo is shown often to have a positive result. So people just believing they're taking a treatment is often enough for the body to begin to respond and heal. And a medication actually has to show that it's better than just consciousness alone to be effective in the healing. And there's a mystery in that if you stop and think about it for a minute, because you realize the body has the ability to do this without the medication in a certain number of cases, which means technically it has the ability to do that. And so when you grasp that, you start to realize we're missing a lot in our current understanding of the health paradigm, if you will, or healing. And that's changing because people are beginning to understand there's what you call a quantum level to reality. And so you can think of quantum as a concept where if everything is made of atoms, the quantum world is the world that exists in the subatomic realm. If you went inside the atom and into the dimensions that science describes that exist in the subatomic plane, then you're in the quantum level of reality. And what science, this is all brand new science in the last century, but what this kind of science is talking about is how physical matter will show up in a certain way only when it's being observed or only when consciousness is being focused on it. And the consciousness will affect how it is expressed. And that translates into some new sciences like epigenetics, for example. A lot of people have heard of Bruce Lipton and his work, and many other scientists as well that are working in this realm of genetics, where they show that social and cultural influences can have a profound impact on whether the genetics in a person's gene makeup are expressed or not expressed. So, the consciousness that is around the individual and part of the individual's reality will have a bearing on their health and their well-being. So there's a whole new world of consciousness-based application that's coming into it. Now, the ascension is a whole other aspect of that paradigm. And so this awakening of consciousness is happening now for a reason. So humanity has been kind of living relatively in the dark about all of this. Now, the knowledge of energy and consciousness and the energy fields of the body the etheric body, the energetic emotional body, the mental body, all these elements of energy structure that people are talking about now have been known for a very long time. And in Eastern systems of healing, like Tibetan medicine and ancient, Indian medicine, or Vedic medicine, when we go back to these times, the healers of the day had this innate knowledge of the energy structure of the body, and they worked with this energy element of the body. The pulses in Chinese medicine, it's sensing the energy flow within the body, or working with the meridians that are part of the etheric field. And so they've been working with this energy for a very long time. But in the West, we're just a little bit more 3D. So we work with the visible, we work with the solid, the chemical, the biological, so on and so forth. It's not better or worse. They're just different ways of approaching the paradigm of healing. But this mysterious element of healing, the mystical element of healing that's been part of Eastern traditions, has not been well integrated into Western science. And that's changing now. That's starting to happen, by some very pioneering thinkers and physicians and healers, people who are open-minded to new concepts and new ideas. And we're seeing a blend of those two worlds take place. And so that's great, and it's timely, but it's also part of this bigger process that we'll talk about now, which is called the Ascension. So the Ascension is happening right now on the planet. And you can think of the Ascension as an energetic rise in vibration. So the planet's energy, base energy, if you will, the vibration of that energy is rising. Now, what does that mean? Does it just mean it becomes more energetic, or, we're all more nervous because we're vibrating higher? It's actually a rise in consciousness, and secondarily a rise in energy. So in order to understand the Ascension, you have to open your mind a little bit. If this is information that someone's not been exposed to, you kind of have to just pause for a minute and say, could this possibly be? It's not something that you can, really prove to someone until you start to look at objective evidence. But what the Ascension really means is that the planet is on a time scale where we're about to make a transition from one level of consciousness or reality to a higher level of consciousness or reality. And this happens as part of a much bigger galactic experience. So in other words, when we look at planetary cycles, we can, we understand the concept of a second, a minute, a day, a month, so on and so forth. And so these are time references that we can relate to in our human life and our human reality. But there are much bigger cycles of time. And they're related to the Earth's relationship and the solar system's relationship to its placement in the galaxy and its relationship with other planets and stars. So this is not something we think about on Monday morning usually, but it's a bigger time scale than we tend to focus on. But the Earth is part of a structure, and the way to think about it is like this. If it's December 31st at the end of a year, and it happens to be a Saturday night, and it's about to be midnight, when the clock strikes 12, at that very second, we have made a transition that includes a new second, it's a new day, it's a new hour, it's a new week, it's a new year. And so at that same moment in time, all of those other cycles of time converge to a point. In other words, there's 52 weeks, there's 12 months, there's, however many minutes and seconds and hours, and the cycles oscillate at different frequencies through time, but at some point in time, they all come together at exactly the same moment in time. So it's a convergence of cycles. And it's a really brilliant concept to understand what's happening on a bigger scale. Because when we look at the Earth's rotation through the galaxy, every 26,000 years, I should go back a step. There's a wobble in the Earth so that its northern axis is rotating. And because it's shifting all the time, what's north from our planet, the star system that's north from our planet, will change over these broad swaths of time. And what we call these are astrological ages. So we know, for example, there's the age of Aquarius, the age of Pisces, the age of Taurus, and so on and so forth. And we're going into the age of Aquarius at this point in time. So the Beatles told us that, right? So we're going into this new time cycle. And what happens in the Earth when we look at the large scale of time is every 26,000 years, the Earth's north axis centers back towards the center of the galaxy. So it's kind of a reset point. And it kind of just demonstrates that the Earth is on a time scale. Now, what's really important about this is when we get to that point of transition, things have to change. Now, the Earth had two options. In other words, when we get back to this point in time, the Earth has the option to go into a new octave of energy or to stay the same. And if it would have stayed the same, it would have meant a decline of civilization. So in other words, society, the culture of humanity as we know it on the very planetary scale would have gone through a demise. And this has happened many times before. You know, archaeology is starting to show this. There's been these cycles of 5,000 to 10,000 years, and there have been civilizations that grew and then they disappeared for whatever reasons, you know, ice ages and comets and all kinds of different big galactic things. But the civilizations kind of came to an end and then they started again. There was like a reset and humans started again. But at the mark of this time scale, which the Mayans have referred to in their teachings, because they were very expert at monitoring these cycles of time. They had a very deep knowledge and understanding of time cycles. And they described a date of December 21st, 2012, which they described as the end of a time cycle, although it got translated into the end of time. So that's great for Hollywood and movies and all that kind of stuff. But the real meaning of that is it's the end of a cycle of time, and it's the beginning, by virtue of that, of a new cycle of time. And when you would ask the wisdom keepers in these traditions, well, what is life like in this new cycle of time? They would say, well, we don't know yet, because you can't actually know that until you step into the new energy and the new space of that new cycle. So they could prophesize right up to the end of the old time cycle, but they can't prophesize into the new time cycle because it's unwritten. It's not been established. The only thing that they could say about it is that we're leaving a cycle of duality-based consciousness and entering into a realm of unity consciousness. And so that's a small statement, but it's a very big concept, because what it means, if you break it down a little bit, is we're entering into a wisdom cycle. It's a cycle where the polarity of duality is not controlling reality the same way it is now. And so there's a lot of good and evil, there's a lot of dark and light, there's a lot of competition between these forces on the planet, and we're about to go into a cycle where things operate in a unity. And it's unimaginable to us right now on the planet what that might be like. Like, imagine a civilization where people lived in that balance, where there really are no wars. People do not war with each other because they realize there's a higher way of solving problems and coming to solutions and moving society forward. And so we're babies. We're just in the first years of this new time cycle. So it's not super evident yet that we're there, unless you have this knowledge, I guess, or this understanding. But it's not too hard to recognize that the planet is changing. And so if you turn on the news, of course, it's full with a lot of horrific stories, and there's all kinds of darkness being exposed in all kinds of different ways, and so on and so forth. And it's a little daunting. In fact, it can be overwhelming and heartbreaking if you really immerse yourself in it. But if you take a step back and you understand what's really happening here, is that everything that needs to be surfaced, that needs to be healed, that needs to be integrated to move the planet forward into this new time cycle is going to come up to the surface. And what's happening is that not all the things we're learning about today on the news are new. We see these things and we think, well, how could that have been going on for like hundreds of years or 10 generations or whatever? Or how does this company get away with doing that? Or so on and so forth. It's not new that it's happening. What's new is that it's being exposed. And so it's actually a testament to the fact that we're lightening. There's more light. And because darkness can only live when there's no light, right? Like if the light is shone on an issue, or we bring consciousness to a problem and we begin to enlighten the situation, we bring healing into the moment. But you can't do that until you can encounter the dark. You can't fix a problem that you don't know about. And so when we look at the news, if we kind of hold that understanding in our hearts, we can celebrate what's happening, because it's kind of bringing up the best and the worst of humanity. It's bringing up all the issues and the problems and things that have been hidden in the dark and controlled for a long time, kept out of view. It's harder and harder to hide these things and keep them concealed, you know. So you see lots of manifestations of that in business and politics and healthcare and human life and in you name it, you know, right from the level of a community association all the way up to big power players in the political realm of the planet. And so there's a tremendous relief, I think, that comes when you start to understand that, because at first you think things are getting worse. It actually looks like, oh my gosh, ascension, what are you talking about? The planet's never been so crazy and chaotic and what have you. But when you really take a step back and realize it's part of a bigger process. It's a process that's going to raise the energy, bring light into things, and begin to create very creative solutions that will solve a lot of the problems that we encounter on a human scale. And so it'll be a time of discovery. There'll be lots of new inventions. We're going to see, you know, a shift in science and a shift in all kinds of things that help us bring the planet to a place where we're back in honor and we're back in balance with the earth. And it's necessary that we do that. We're starting to understand that the planet is a living unity. It's humanity is one race, and the planet is one being, and we are children of that mother being. So the earth is our mother. And your physical body, every cell in it, every molecule in it, every bit and piece of it is formed from the elements of the earth. We couldn't have a body to sit in here and talk to each other unless the earth gave us the grace of the physical elements to be able to build that body in the first place. So we're starting to understand that we are intimately related to the earth. The earth is our mother, and we are one with that mother. And that we're also one with each other. Humanity is a collective being. And that when we start to understand these broader concepts, it makes new thinking possible. You realize that all of the spiritual teachings that have been given over time have been trying to tell us this in different ways. But now we're at a point where we're starting to understand it. We can cognize it. We can conceptualize it. And it's not just spiritual, mystical talk. It can be understood in a more quantum and a scientific sense as well. So, you know, years ago, if a mystic would have said, oh, you must learn to think in an affirmative way, and you must let go of your negative thoughts and all this kind of stuff, we would honor it as a spiritual teaching. But today we start to understand that consciousness creates matter. And so the way we poise our mind and think habitually, we're bringing it into life. And so that's not mystical at all anymore. We can all understand that in a very concrete and simplified way. And so we can use that knowledge to our advantage, because if you start to understand the power of that, you can begin to more consciously control the way you think, or what you allow your mind to be doing, or handle, you know, come to terms with feelings that you've not healed or brought to the surface to heal, and learn how to step out of habitual patterns of feeling and thinking that bring you into a negative or a dark space. So you become more responsible, you become more conscious, and you become more capable of, you can think of it, I guess, as taking charge of your reality or being in command of your reality. Now that tends to have an authoritarian energy to it when we say those words, so it can be misunderstood. But it's not like that. It's a spiritual command. It's a sense of, you understand the integrity of your being, and you understand the divinity that you carry inside you as a spiritual presence, and that you deserve to live that way, and that you have the authority within you to make your life a reflection of that. So it comes from a place of great love, not control or power. It comes from a place of understanding. And so when you look at teachers like Jesus, you know, who would say things to humanity that seemed, they were metaphoric and they seemed so mystical, you know, when he would give his teachings in various sermons and things like that. But if you look at them with fresh eyes, he was a teacher of this new age. He was a person who already was immersed in unity consciousness. He had already gone through this inner transformation. And so human beings are living that today. There are hundreds and thousands of people who are awakening up to this spiritual understanding. And at the very cornerstone of that, I think, is the awareness that you are a divine being. In other words, you are a spirit having a human expression or human experience. And so that's not how we've traditionally been taught to think. You know, we've been told we're born dirty and you have to grovel your way up to the light, and maybe, you know, if some force of light shines on you that day, you'll be graced, and, you know, you might get some kind of salvation, and so on and so forth, which is a far cry from understanding the light of spirit, however you understand that, God, creator, universe, whatever word is comfortable. The light of that consciousness is in you. It's who you are. You're part of that. And you are one with that force of reality. And when you see that, when you cognize it, not just hear it as a nice thought and say, oh, that's a nice idea, but really understand it's the truth. That is really who you are. It begins to unravel a lot of the things that we think and feel and perceive. And so when you know your worth, when you know your spiritual integrity, when you understand that the light of spirit is in you and it shines through you, and you have the capacity for enormous love and enormous health and enormous well-being, and you let that come out of you, you let it shine out of you, if you will, it begins a transformation. And people talk about that as a spiritual awakening. So you're kind of awakening to the spirit within. But it's a reversal from the way we've been taught about spiritual things. We've been told that your soul is outside of you somewhere, like it's up in heaven or outside your body in some way. You're a human being. You hope to have a spiritual experience. But it's really the opposite. You're a spiritual being who's living a human incarnation. And so with that comes the unraveling of all kinds of beliefs, which is challenging, you know, when you first begin to do that. You see so many people grapple with that in their own individual way. And we call it the path, you know, our individual path. We have to go through our own journeys of unraveling our belief systems and thinking and healing issues that we have within us that keep us limited from the potential of what is meant by those words. And so healing at its very biggest level is a deep, deep spiritual integration. It's sort of recalling the light of your soul and your spirit back into your body, and allowing that energy and consciousness to be with you in a way that can help you manifest healing and manifest changes that reflect what are really your heart's desire. So it's a big answer, but I hope it covers the concept reasonably well.
Yeah, that was amazing. There was so much in that. And I wanted to go back to planetary ascension.
Yeah.
So the planet chose to, instead of staying the same, raise the vibration.
Correct.
And what's causing the individuals to also wake up
Right.
and raise our vibration? Is it because the planet is ascending we have to?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Yeah, it is. So just to go back and add a little clarity maybe around some of the points. So the planet chose to ascend, but the choice was not like it wasn't like an election where everybody went and cast their ballot, you know, what are we going to do today? What it really was a measurement of spiritual maturity. In other words, if you think about humanity as a whole, and you could measure the collective vibration of each and every human being on the planet, and, you know, say someone is operating, you know, at a Buddha level of vibration over here, and there's a Christ level of vibration over here, and then you have people who are like, you know, crooked, stealing and bank robbers and all kinds of stuff over here. There's a whole mixture of levels of consciousness. But if you did a summation or a summary, and looked at that number, say we were vibrating at, you know, 30% of our capacity, we were at a level where humanity could be safely propelled into what's called ascension status. Okay. In other words, if we tried to do this without a certain level of consciousness, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't be effective because it would create chaos. And so it would have the opposite effect. But if the consciousness is high enough to begin to assimilate and integrate what comes with an ascended level of reality, in other words, if there were enough human beings who were loving enough and awake enough to begin to take the charge of that energy and begin to manifest it in new ways and integrate it into the human experience, then we would slowly move the world forward into this ascended state of being. Because it happens through human beings. It has to go through us. And so with that, the energy of the planet was poised to be increased, and there were all kinds of changes. You know, the magnetic grid of the Earth was shifted, and the crystalline grid was, it's a whole other concept. We won't really go into that right now, but there's an understanding of all these grids and energy parts of the Earth that were adjusted and are stirring up and awakening to raise the vibration of the planet in an incremental way day by day. And that's having a triggering effect on the human being. And the reason that's the case is because the quantum field of DNA that's part of our individual human expression is intimately related to the quantum energy of the planet. So we're her children, remember? We are all individual expressions of the Earth. So as the energy of the Earth is rising, it affects at a very subatomic level or a quantum level the energy of our own DNA system. So it's triggering a DNA awakening. That's what's happening. So the energy of the DNA is being stirred to a higher level of vibration. And the higher that the energy field of that goes, there are certain things that we consider natural today, like certain diseases and stuff, that eventually, as the energy keeps rising, they're just going to disappear because they can't exist at this higher level of vibration that we move to. Now, I know someone who's very immersed in 3D thinking would find that incredulous. They would kind of roll their eyes to have a good chuckle at a statement like that. However, it is true. Like, only time will prove it, but it is true. We'll start to see that this is what's going to happen down the line. Now, individuals can personally make a conscious decision to align with that transformation. Okay. And when we do that, we're facilitating it. We're making it more comprehensible, and I'm shy to say easier because it doesn't necessarily make it easier, but it makes it more understandable. So you learn to work with yourself through the change, and that takes the overwhelm out of it. I don't think it makes it easier, but it makes it less scary. Because people's lives are changing anyway, and you see this, like people are either going through this process of conscious transformation or their reality is just kind of falling apart in many ways. And so it's nice to have a deeper understanding of what's really taking place, even if it is falling apart at a moment in time, that you're moving forward into a new level of vibration. And so lots of people are having these kinds of experiences. You know, you were living your life, and then all of a sudden you don't like your job anymore, and you don't feel aligned, and you have friendships, but you find you can't really talk to your friends. It's kind of, you don't feel inspired, and you start to meet other people with different ideas, and you find that amazing, and then you feel alive again, and you find yourself in resonance with a new reality. So it's a very natural process. Like, people don't stop and necessarily understand that, but that's really what is driving all that change. And I'll sometimes say to people when I'm talking, to groups of people, how many people in the room have had more than one significant relationship, a romantic relationship in their life? And almost everybody will put up their hand. I've been married twice, or I've had 3 serious partners, or blah, blah. Everybody will tell their own story. And if you go back 100 years or 200 years, that's not how life was. People, you were born, you picked a job, you had a partner, you kind of, for better or worse, you lived it out to the end. You died, and then you reincarnated and came back again. But in this time, people are going through almost like rapid cycling. They're going through all kinds of transformations in the same human lifetime. And so that introduces a whole part of healing, which can only be understood in the ascension context, because what happens to us as we awaken is we become aware of our multidimensional nature. And what that stirs up in us is an Akashic opening. And what happens there is people start to become aware that this isn't the only life you've ever lived. Bottom line. You've lived other lifetimes, and the energy and the experiences of those lifetimes can bleed over or have an influence on this lifetime. And so that with the advent of that comes all kinds of new therapies like past life regression and people doing work to recover memories and release the emotional charge around some of these memories and the influence that they have on our life and the fear that they may be creating in our current lifetime. And so, but what's really happening there, it's not just remembering a past life or learning that, it's your opening to your multi-dimensional energy field. And what happens is we clear through some of the more difficult memories or emotions in that field, you begin to have access to much more knowledge and much more experience than you did before that happened to you. And so you start to remember not only problems, like you, for example, if people are awakening, they may remember the way they died in another lifetime, or they may have been a healer and they were killed for the healing work that they did. And so when they go through this process today, every bit and piece of them screams, no, don't do this. I don't want to go there. This doesn't end well. So there's this innate protective fear that kind of gets triggered by the awakening. And people have to work through that. They have to go through it because this is a very different time. It's safe today to show your light. And it wasn't safe years ago to show your light. So as we move into this new paradigm, that's going to be integrated. And then I think perhaps one of the more remarkable places we see evidence of this is in the children. And so anybody who has seen at least 2 generations pass before their eyes, so someone, in their 40s or 50s or older, some people have even seen 3 generations. If you ask someone with that experience, are children today the same or different from when you were a child? People will say, it's a different species. Like, these kids are so different from what I was when I was a kid and from the way culture was. Now, there's good elements and bad elements to that, of course, but people recognize that kids today are very, very different. And the reason they're different is because our humanity on a big scale is beginning to be wired up to live in this new energy. And so these kids are really the forebearers of that. They come with a bit of a different energy structure. Right. And so we call them all kinds of names like indigo kids and crystal kids and rainbow kids, or, and all these new phenomena like ADD and ADHD and all that kind of stuff. Almost all of that is really an expression of the energetic change. And so these kids are different and they don't learn the same way. They can't just be rotely told something and you expect them to believe it. If it doesn't pass through the filter of their discernment as truth, they won't accept it as true. And so they have this autonomy about them, or this confidence often that people misinterpret as arrogance, but really they're just comfortable in their own being, and that gets misinterpreted in the old energy, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's taken some of us a long time to work to get to that place. Yeah. And they've come in like that.
Correct.
I did want to ask you quickly about, some people are consciously evolving and ascending and aware of this, but they report ascension symptoms, so like physical ailments in the body. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. So first of all, it's legitimate. It really is happening. And it's not easy. And this is why earlier I was kind of reticent to say having the awareness of what's happening makes it easier. I don't think it does make it easier. It just makes it less fearful. And this is an example of that. So when you are having symptoms like your body gets really, really sore and you have this stiffness and soreness all over your body, you think at first you might be sick. And the mystery of it is sometimes people are, like you can have those feelings because of an illness, but you can also feel sore because of the energetic adjustments. And so when a new energy, imagine if your body is physical and you've been running 110 volts through it, and now you plug into a European current and 220 volts are going through it, it's overcharging the system. So the body has to get used to this new frequency. It's like we're fish in a pond and we're swimming around in the water, and the water is higher in vibration. So our body has to incrementally adapt to the energy of our space. And so there's waves of that energy. It comes with solar cycles and solar bursts and all these different things that are part of the galactic structure. And so we go through these downloads of energy and these surges of energy, and the earth is making her adjustments and so on. And so it's a whole energetic matrix that's changing while we're living in our physical body. So it can make you feel tired, it can make you feel dizzy, it can make you feel dizzy to the point where you think you're falling off your feet, and you may even fall down. You get ringing in your ears. You can get emotions that come up out of nowhere, and they're completely unrelated to the context of the experiences that you're living, but somehow weave their way into them. Like, you're really angry and upset, but it's not really at the person you're talking to. It's like something in you and it's coming up. Strange experiences like that. Physical nausea, vomiting, people get diarrhea, sore joints, rashes, all kinds of physical symptoms. And many of them can be illness related. So I always say to people, if something is new and you're worried about it, go get it checked out. Just always have, someone who understands medicine take a look and make sure there's not. But if there is no underlying diagnosis, or, you have your thyroid checked and there's no problem, and you have your heart checked and there's no problem, then be reassured by it if you're in this movement of energy, because it's actually just evidence that you're going through this change. And when you see it in that light, it also changes how you see it. You realize, okay, it feels crappy, but it's a good thing in the end. It's taking me somewhere. The other thing that happens is just disturbances in sleep cycles. So people will often wake up at night or not. They'll have a hard time falling asleep, or they'll fall asleep and they'll wake up in the middle of the night and they can't seem to fall back to sleep. And then, of course, the mind starts and you think, before you know it, you're not getting your sleep. And if you're working, and that can be very difficult. Like, you're going to get tired, and then that's dangerous, and so on. But what I've learned to do over the years is, if I wake up at night and I'm like really stirred awake, I'll actually consciously think, oh, I'm awakening because my energy is adjusting. Right. And so instead of getting all mental and agitated by it, I try to find this place of gratitude, and I think, oh, thank you. My body is being upgraded. I can feel it. I'm going to go into that place of gratefulness and settle down. And that, strangely, that's been enough to allow me to go back to sleep. So that's what I personally did with that. But it's a whole different frame of thinking. You can't do that if you don't understand the ascension is taking place. So that's why the knowledge is really powerful, I think, and helps people in an enormous way to understand.
That's a fantastic tip. Thank you. I wish I had that last night.
Well, you do tonight.
Fantastic. Okay, so you spoke about planetary ascension and said, I believe, that it's waking up our DNA.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about this quantum DNA field and how that relates to healing and your unity field healing?
Of course, yeah. So the work is, so in trying to describe this work, it's easy if someone is esoteric in their thinking, if they've worked with Reiki and energy modalities and these types of things. But if someone is brand new to this just seems like from out of the blue, like it doesn't make any sense at all. But it's not hard to understand. But the work came to me through a series of visionary experiences. And in my own personal life, going back to like around the beginning of the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I began to have what's called today a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. I began to have all these energetic things happening in my body, and I would pop out of my body and have consciousness while looking at my physical body, lying down in the bed. The roof would disappear from the house and I could see the stars from inside the room. And there were all these strange, bizarre experiences that went over the course of a few months. And I had no idea what I was living personally when this was all going on. But you can imagine that it sent me on a path to try to figure it out. It was very scary, actually, because it was a time when knowledge of Kundalini yoga and Kundalini and energy healing and all that stuff really wasn't as popular and prevalent as it is today. And so I had no idea how to find an answer to what I was living. But the irony of it was I was a physician. I just finished medical school. So I knew the answer didn't lie there. I thought I could go see someone, but they're going to not be able to help me. They're going to think I'm crazy, and they're not going to be able to help me in a meaningful way. And I was raised in a Catholic family, so I kind of had a connection with a certain spirituality, or a sense of spirituality. And I thought I would never go to anybody spiritual that I knew and tell them these things, because they would think I was possessed or something crazy. So I knew where I couldn't find answers, but I didn't know where to find answers. And so I remember one day, just kind of in a state of like frustration, I just said, like, show me if there's, I need to know what I'm living. And a couple of days later, I had this huge inspiration one morning to go to a bookstore in town that had a lot of spiritual books, kind of a new age bookstore, new consciousness thinking bookstore. But it was one of the very first of these kinds of stores. And it had a lot of books about spirituality, Eastern spiritual systems, crystals, healing, all these kinds of things, all very new to me. And I walked in the store, and I remember I felt so overwhelmed. I thought, how am I ever going to find anything in here that means anything to me? And all of a sudden, one of the books, as my eyes went across it, literally magnified on the shelf. And I looked and kind of did a double take, and I thought, really? Now, this is before computers. So you know how today when you run your mouse over an icon, it magnifies on your screen. Right. The book really kind of did this on the bookshelf. And as I went over and took the book off the shelf, it was called The Spontaneous Awakening of Kundalini by Gopi Krishna. And I looked and I read the back cover, and I thought, this is unbelievable. And so it was an answer to my personal prayer. It was like I put out an invocation or a request for help. And then through synchronicity and intuition, I was led to an answer. So the experience became a profound personal teaching for me, because I started to understand that the way things work in this energy as you awaken is through intuition. And your intuition will lead you to things that are non-rational. Your mind can only take you to the limit of what you already know.
Right.
If you're going to learn something you don't know, you have to be led there some other way. And so your intuition is a very powerful tool, because it'll bring to you solutions that you don't know how to find through a logical context. And so I would never have thought of going to this bookstore based on my logical paradigm. It's not where I would have gone, but yet I found myself there. And then the synchronicity of discovering the book and how it helped me understand what I was living was profound. And it also catalyzed me into exploring Eastern systems of healing. And so you can see how it all weaves together in the story. But in retrospect, I didn't know all that. I only knew what I was living at the moment in time. And then through the course of time, I began to have some other energetic experiences. I began to have visions. And there'd be times when I would be shown things through my third eye, or kind of the easiest way to conceptualize this is when you're dreaming. You know how you see images like they're a movie, or there's a reality that you're seeing inside your head. So when I would meditate and do things, sometimes I would have these very profound experiences where I would be shown energetic things. And in a couple of visions, I was shown the nature of the quantum field of energy that exists around our human DNA. And then I was introduced to a light template, which I call today the Unity Field Healing Template. It was a pattern of light that formed like a geometry. And it was introduced in a way. If people want to learn about it, they can read about it on my website, because I kind of describe, I won't go into all the detail right now, but it was a light pattern that came, and it showed me that this pattern works within the human DNA field, this quantum DNA field that I was shown, to recalibrate the energy of that structure. And so we can work more consciously with the DNA using this light patterning, or the consciousness of this light patterning, to help restructure the DNA field. And so that's the foundational essence of what Unity Field Healing is about. And then over the course of time, it evolved into an understanding of the sessions that we're doing. The first session, for example, in Unity Field Healing, is self-attunement. It's aligning your consciousness with your own quantum DNA structure. And then the second session is an attunement to the template. And the third session is working consciously with issues that you're encountering on your own personal journey. So for example, if you're having anxiety, or issues with your health or whatever, you can bring the awareness of the issue into the healing session and work within the quantum DNA field and the light patterning to help restructure, or to begin to restructure the energy to allow it to manifest in a different way. So it's very mystical, I understand, but that's the essence of the work. And so it was first done by audio sessions. I pre-recorded the sessions, and people listen to them, and you go into a meditative state with the session, and then it's a healing process. And then in the last couple of years, I've also started to train practitioners. So people who do healing work have started to align with it, and they've done the training. We have about 100 practitioners now on the planet. So people who do this work for other people in the form of energy attunements. And then, since we're getting very mystical, I'll tell you the rest of the story. In March of this year, I was introduced in a vision to the Sirians, the civilization of Sirius. And they came in the form of light beings, and they told me that they are the actual light beings that are behind this work. They're the spiritual force that's working with us to help manifest healing through this work. So when I'm doing the attunements for the practitioners, you're getting your goosebumps?
I have chills all over.
So when people begin to work with the pattern, the Sirians they're doing the attunements, the practitioner attunements, and they come when people are doing the sessions, either receiving them or as a practitioner helping another person do them. So they come energetically or quantumly, however you want to understand that, and they participate in the process. So we're starting to work more consciously with these light beings or these ascended civilizations in our healing journey. Wow. So that's all new. That all just happened this year, that level of information. So
that sounds wonderful. But this is something people can do for themselves, or
Absolutely.
they can go deeper with a practitioner.
Yeah, the easiest way, like if you can see practitioners to have the sessions, but the easiest way around the world to do it probably is through the audio session. So on the website, it's unityfieldhealing.com. Okay. And the website, you can go to a section where you can purchase the audio sessions. And I've made them very affordable. Like they're recorded with high quality, but it's only $65 to buy the whole program of sessions. And the third session it can be redone. In other words, you use the same session, the same process, but the intention you're bringing into the session can evolve. So if you have 3 or 4 different issues, you can do the session with a different intention. And the way the session works is the energetic response aligns with the intention or the consciousness that you're bringing to the session. And so the response will be different. So you have the audio and you just can use it over again, but you do it with a different intention in mind. And so it's a wonderful tool. People have had amazing experiences working with it. And now, as I understand, working with the Sirians.
Sounds fantastic. And I know you have a free gift for the audience.
Yes, I do actually. If people, I think you'll put a link probably on the site. So people go to the link and you just submit your name. It's a contest. So I'm going to choose 3 people who submit their names and to give them the healing session, the whole package of healing sessions as a gift.
That is so generous. Thank you so much. What a wonderful.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah.
I think I want to enter this.
Put your name in.
Oh, John, this has just been so fantastic. I could continue talking to you for hours, but I know our time is coming to an end. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to share today?
I think the thing I would most want to share is a sense of hope. It's a difficult time. There's so much happening on the planet. There's so much uncertainty. It's wonderful for us to have this lofty realization, lofty conversations. But yet when we're in our practical everyday life, it can be a little less glamorous than that. It can be very difficult. And when you turn on the news, you can worry about the world. You look at your children and you think, my gosh, what are they going to grow up into? There's so much fear that's being stirred up in the collective human psyche right now. And to have the understanding of what's happening and to find your own way of returning to your center and to step out of that fear program and into the place of balance and higher realization is so fundamental, and it's so available. It just takes understanding. Like it's not confusing or difficult. It just, with a little bit of openness and a little bit of understanding, you find your own way back there. And it's really my prayer, my hope, that everybody gets to know that and do that and finds that center in themselves. And it serves to anchor them in the energy of what we're growing into and to bring peace and happiness and health in every way possible.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your amazing wisdom.
It's truly been my pleasure, absolutely. And congratulations on your summit.